Well, a wetland, by many people's standards, is somewhere that's swampy and marshy. So there is an international convention called the Ramsar Convention, and there's a funny way that they have of saying what a wetland is, or the staff of the secretariat of the convention, because there are about 20 different kinds of wetlands listed. And if you put that into common English, it's a piece of land that is wet, has been wet, might become wet with fresh or salt water. So it's a lot of different things. And when you think in Australia of the dry lakes in central Australia, these are wetlands, even though maybe for 20 years they're dry. And then when they're wet, they're very, very wet. They're important for a huge number of reasons. They're important reservoirs for all kinds of species that live in them, or live partly in the wetland and partly outside. And we're standing here on a totally artificial wetland that was constructed presumably deliberately during the landscaping, but maybe not even deliberately, and it's turned into a really nice wetland. When there's water in it, ducks come, and when there isn't, they go away to where there is water. So it's a useful thing for all kinds of species. But much more important for us as people, wetlands actually are really good places to manage water flow. So in droughts, they keep water. In times of too much rain, too much water, they can actually manage the flow. They act like sponges, in other words, and dampen the flow. And a lot of the problems we get in Australia from flash flooding and so on are because too many wetlands have been either converted or destroyed in building small towns or even large cities. If we actually managed our wetlands better, we'd have more natural solutions to these problems, which are only going to increase, as we know. World Wetlands Day is February the 2nd every year, and the reason it's February the 2nd is that is the date in 1971, we're going back quite a few years now, when 17 nations sat down in the town of Ramsar in Iran on the southern shore of the Caspian Sea, which is why it's called the Ramsar Convention. And those signatories on the 2nd of February 1971 put their name to the piece of paper that said, we agree to create a convention. Interestingly, Australia wasn't one of them, but we were the first country that actually subsequently signed and at the same time put into law, our law, the Ramsar Convention requirements. And so Australia was partly a latecomer, but actually also first off the ramp. And we have the first wetland of international importance site in the world, in Coburg Peninsula in the Northern Territory. The importance of World Wetlands Day basically is to allow the world to come together to celebrate wetlands and to promote their conservation and long-term sustainable use, or as the convention itself says, wise use, which I think is a nicer way of saying it. So it's about people celebrating wetlands on one day all over the world simultaneously. And that's a great thing to do. There are so many days now, maybe people think there are too many, but this is a really important one because we've lost more wetlands than any other ecosystem in the last, certainly in the last 100 years, and that's accelerating in one sense, but also new wetlands are being created as well. Go for a walk, look for local wetlands. There's all kinds of wetlands around Canberra. Jerrabombra wetlands are a really good example of an excellent wetland that's mostly man-created, or human-created, I should say. It's got introduced things there, but there's a lot of native plants and animals that are also there. It's a good mixture, and of course it's very wet. But there are all kinds of little places like this, which are partly wet, that people can discover for themselves. Even in what looks like a dry situation, you can find evidence of wetlands. So go out, take a walk, look for wetlands. Go to Lake Burley Griffin. It's a wetland, totally artificial, but it's also doing all the functions that wetlands do.